Lightning cracked across the morning sky as I jolted awake, heart pounding at the distant roar of bulldozers. My family's farm, once serene, was suddenly threatened by a shiny new development proposed by the local HOA. They wanted to replace our acres of crops and memories with a dream neighborhood, complete with pristine lawns and uniform mailboxes. This project meant leveling everything my grandfather built. My palms trembled at the thought. But I had a secret weapon hidden in the old deed. One legal clause might save everything. Let me tell you how it began. Grandpa always said our land carried generations of hope, sweat, and perseverance. I refused to let them pave it over without a fight. That morning I stood at the window, watching dust plumes swirl from the machinery beyond our fence. My pulse thumped with equal parts fear and determination. Before I could protest, the Homeowners Association had secured nearly every permit, boasting about modern design and high property values. My father's barn was just another obstacle to them. I clutched a faded photograph of him holding me by the silo, wishing I could ask his advice. The developers believed farmland was outdated, but I knew it still held purpose. I needed time and allies. That's when I discovered an obscure sentence buried in the original deed, a clause stating any future development must incorporate actual farming or face legal repercussions. It was truly our one shot at stopping them. I raced to the county records office, rummaging through dusty files and scanned images. The farmland's deed hadn't been altered in decades, so few people even knew that clause existed. My heart pounded as I confirmed its validity with an overwhelmed clerk. She frowned at me, cautioning that powerful forces stood behind the HOA. Rewriting the property's fate might require an expensive court battle. Still, I had a glimmer of hope. If the HOA wanted to build here, they'd have to keep some portion of it in legitimate agricultural use. Perhaps that would force them to reconsider their reckless plan. That evening I met with a few neighbors who'd farmed alongside my family. Most were elderly, resigned to losing their land to subdivisions. Still, a spark ignited when I showed them the crucial text. Could we really challenge the HOA? They warned me about the association's deep pockets and political connections, yet they also offered moral support, sharing stories of harvests and hardships that shaped our heritage. Some suggested forming a coalition or seeking a friendly lawyer. One neighbor recalled a rumored developer who might negotiate if forced to respect farmland. Perhaps we had more leverage than we realized, indeed. Bright and early the next day, I walked the perimeter of our fields, boots sinking into dew-soaked soil. I paused by the rickety fence Dad once mended, remembering how he'd promised our land would stay in our family forever. The HOA's fancy brochures never showed the quiet grace of morning sun glistening over cornrows. They only saw dollar signs. My chest felt tight. If we lost now, our farm would be flattened into curated lawns for strangers. Determined, I called an old friend who'd studied property law. Though she wasn't a miracle worker, she might guide me toward a legal strategy. That friend, Selena, arrived in her battered sedan with a stack of law textbooks piled in the back seat. She wasn't part of a big firm, but she had grit. Over coffee, we pored over the deed. "This clause is unusual," she said, brow furrowed, "but it's valid as long as it's clearly recorded." My spirits lifted even as she explained potential loopholes the HOA might exploit. We needed public support and airtight arguments in case of a showdown. Selena advised caution. They'll claim the farmland requirement is vague or outdated. We have to prove its ongoing relevance, no matter what. While Selena examined legal precedents, I knocked on neighbors' doors, collecting signatures to demand that local authorities enforce the deed's clause. Many shrugged, unaware that a single line of text could derail a multi-million-dollar project. Others enthusiastically signed, recalling how farmland once bonded our community. I told them about my grandfather, who believed that preserving farmland was about more than profit. It was about soul. Word spread. A farmer from 2 towns over mentioned an environmental group that championed sustainable development. We reached out, hoping they'd help amplify our cause. Little by little, people realized we weren't just stalling progress. Meanwhile, construction crews positioned themselves on adjacent parcels, clearing trees and leveling earth. The HOA had already acquired most surrounding properties. My farmland stood like a final holdout, a stubborn patch of green amid an encroaching sea of cement. Each morning I'd see workers in hard hats, their machinery grumbling ominously. My stomach twisted at the sight. They hadn't started on my land yet, but it felt inevitable if we couldn't halt them legally. At sunset, I'd walk the rows, letting the rustle of cornstalks calm my nerves. We weren't giving up. That single clause was still a mighty shield. Tensions rose when an HOA representative, Angela Rhodes, arrived at my doorstep. She wore a crisp suit and carried glossy pamphlets detailing the dream neighborhood they were marketing. "You're standing in the way of something wonderful," she said, a polite but chilly smile gracing her lips. I explained our position, referencing the deed. Angela waved it off as a relic from simpler times, insisting progress couldn't be changed by outdated language. She offered a buyout, a sum that might tempt many struggling farmers, but I refused, determined to uphold tradition. Angela's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Then we'll see you in court." As word of that confrontation spread, the local paper ran a story. "Farmer challenges HOA with bizarre deed clause." The headline stung, trivializing our struggle, but the article sparked curiosity, and soon I found allies among civic-minded residents. Some had grown tired of cookie-cutter developments swallowing every rural area. A local teacher wrote an op-ed defending farmland preservation. A blogger posted photos contrasting the farm's natural beauty with the uniform look of the partially built subdivision. Despite the HOA's PR spin, momentum slowly shifted. We arranged a town hall meeting to discuss alternatives. Maybe there was a path for coexistence. When the night of the town hall meeting arrived, the municipal building buzzed with tension. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. At the podium, a young urban planner presented slides about agrihoods, neighborhoods that integrated working farms. Some developments embraced farmland as a feature rather than an eyesore. The crowd murmured. Angela, seated across the aisle, tapped her foot impatiently. Selena and I emphasized that the deed clause could nudge the HOA to adopt a similar model. If they wanted to build, let them incorporate genuine agriculture. As questions poured in, I felt emboldened. Maybe we weren't so bizarre after all. But Angela countered with reasons they couldn't pivot. Our investors expect a certain aesthetic. Acres of farmland aren't part of the plan. She claimed the cost of building around a real farm would skyrocket. A few spectators booed. Others asked if the developer had even tried. Angela's frustration grew. Her polished facade cracking, she insisted they had every legal right to proceed, rattling off building permits and zoning approval. Selena stepped forward calmly, reminding everyone that a valid clause superseded generic permits. If they wanted to construct over my family's land, they had to comply. The tension felt electric. After the meeting, I huddled with Selena and a small group of supporters by the old barn. One suggested we file an injunction to stop any bulldozers until the courts addressed the clause. Another worried about the expense and drawn-out legal battles. The night air crackled with concern and cautious optimism. I gazed at the barn's peeling paint, picturing Dad carrying feed buckets. This fight went beyond property lines. It was about keeping our roots intact. We decided to formalize a local coalition, the Heartland Preservation Group, aiming to protect farmland from unchecked development. The clause was our rallying cry. Our coalition organized a weekend event on my farm, a harvest fair celebrating local produce, crafts, and music. Families ambled through the rows, sampling fresh corn and admiring the gentle cows in the pasture. Children squealed with delight feeding carrots to horses. Selena gave a brief talk on sustainable land use, while older farmers reminisced about simpler days. Visitors seemed to grasp why our farmland mattered. Though Angela's crew attempted to paint us as relics opposed to modernization, the Harvest Fair's success told a different story. It showed how farmland brought people together, bridging past and future in tangible harmony. Despite the fair's heartwarming reception, the HOA pressed forward. Their legal team requested an expedited hearing, hoping to declare the clause unenforceable. We scrambled to gather documentation proving the deed's integrity. Late nights found Selena hunched over precedent cases, highlighting key passages about land rights. I combed through family records, scanning old letters from Grandpa that referenced this specific restriction. The more we dug, the clearer it became Grandpa had deliberately inserted that clause to prevent a complete takeover by developers. He knew times would change and farmland would be at risk. Now, his foresight might just be our salvation. At the hearing, we faced a panel of county officials. Angela's lawyer, a sleek man named Prescott, argued that farmland was obsolete and no longer served the community's best interest. He cited shifting demographics and the allure of modern housing. Selena countered, emphasizing the clause's binding nature and the farm's potential to feed and educate locals. I testified about my family's legacy, describing how Dad taught me responsibility and stewardship among these fields. Angela tried to undercut my emotional appeal, but one official looked intrigued by the notion of integrating farmland. Still, the decision was deferred. We left unsettled, clinging to hope. Frustration simmered. Every delay meant more houses rose around us, roads paved and power lines installed. My property felt like an island in a storm of concrete. Neighbors reported that real estate brochures were already omitting the farmland entirely. Angela seemed confident the final ruling would favor their development. I started to question whether the clause was enough. Then a late-night email arrived from an urban agricultural consultant named Christine West. She'd read about our struggle and offered guidance on designing farm-inclusive neighborhoods. Intrigued, we arranged a meeting. Perhaps if we presented the county with a viable blueprint, minds might change. Christine arrived in work boots, hair in a messy braid, exuding a no-nonsense aura. She toured my fields, analyzing soil quality, water sources, and topography. Then we sat under the shade of an old oak, discussing how farmland could coexist with new housing. You could maintain a small-scale operation, supply local stores, or even create community garden plots, she proposed. The idea resonated with me. I remembered how Dad once let neighborhood kids help with planting, teaching them the value of real food. Christine believed we could transform the HOA's project into something groundbreaking if they'd cooperate. It was a big if. We drafted a preliminary plan featuring clusters of homes arranged around preserved farmland, walking trails snaking through fields, and a small market area for fresh produce sales. Christine stressed this approach could boost property values and satisfy environmental goals. Our coalition was thrilled, seeing a chance for genuine progress, but we also sensed Angela would dismiss it as unfeasible. We needed a compelling argument to sway the county and the developer. That meant highlighting potential tax benefits, tourism, and community health improvements. Late nights became the norm again, as Selena fine-tuned the legal angles and Christine refined architectural sketches. Our next hearing arrived, the crowd larger than before. Angela's team seemed blindsided when we unveiled Christine's plan. The overhead projector flashed images of a harmonious community, farmland woven into the design. Curious murmurs echoed through the room. Angela scoffed, calling it impractical and too costly. But one official leaned forward, intrigued. We explained that farmland could serve as green space, a local food source, and an educational tool. It wasn't about rejecting development, it was about guiding it responsibly. Angela frowned, likely unaccustomed to such a proactive approach. Tension crackled as the panel prepared to deliberate our competing visions. The officials requested a short recess. People spilled into the hallway, voices buzzing with speculation. Selena and I found a quiet corner to regroup. "We might be onto something," she whispered. "If the county likes Christine's plan, the HOA can't ignore it." Yet Angela glided by, lips pursed. We overheard her telling Prescott they'd do whatever it took to bury that clause or reinterpret it. My hands shook with anger. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Stand your ground when you know you're right. Determined, we headed back into the chamber. One way or another, we would be heard. When proceedings resumed, the panel announced they'd appoint an independent mediator to explore compatibility between the HOA's project and farmland. Angela's team looked displeased, but they couldn't openly reject a county-appointed expert. We exhaled relief. This was progress, albeit incremental. The mediator, a seasoned land use specialist named Hector Ramirez, scheduled meetings with both sides. Hector struck me as fair but firm. He explained that if the clause was legally binding, the HOA had to incorporate real agriculture or negotiate a compromise. Still, compromise required trust, and I doubted Angela had any interest in making farmland a true centerpiece. Our first mediation session took place in a cramped municipal office. Hector sat at the head of a small table flanked by stacks of zoning documents. Angela and Prescott perched on one side, Selena and I on the other. Tension was palpable. Hector asked each party to outline non-negotiables. Angela demanded minimal farmland, citing investor concerns about rural aesthetics. Selena insisted the deed clause mandated more than token garden beds. I stressed that a real farm needed enough acreage to be viable. The conversation seesawed for hours. Hector jotted notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow. By sunset, no agreement had emerged. We reconvened a week later, better prepared. Christine joined us, presenting cost analyses for an agri-HOA. She demonstrated how farmland could elevate property values, attract buyers seeking nature, and reduce environmental impact. Angela remained skeptical, but Prescott's eyes flickered with interest at potential marketing angles. Hector probed deeper. Could you limit farmland to one central area while clustering homes for maximum efficiency? Christine agreed, with conditions ensuring the farm's viability. Angela proposed an even smaller patch, essentially a decorative green space. Selena countered, reminding everyone the clause required genuine agricultural use, not a glorified park. We reached another stalemate. Outside the mediation room, Prescott pulled me aside, voice hushed. If you drop the clause, we'll offer a generous payout. His eyes searched mine, calculating. The sum he whispered was substantial, possibly life-changing, but my pulse quickened with anger. Did he really think money would erase everything this land meant? It's not about greed, I replied, shaking my head. My family built something worth protecting. He sighed, murmuring that progress demanded sacrifices. I walked away, heart heavy. Sure, the payout might solve my personal financial worries, but it would condemn the farm to oblivion. I couldn't betray Grandpa's vision. Meanwhile, the local press followed each development. Reporters lingered outside mediation sessions, snapping photos and seeking quotes. One interviewer asked me, "Why not just move on? Don't you want a better life?" I answered that a better life didn't have to exclude preserving history and feeding communities. A feature piece highlighted the emotional weight farmland carried for families like mine. Angelo granted interviews too, touting modern living and the inevitability of expansion. Public opinion remained divided, but more people began wondering if farmland could offer something missing in the rush towards suburban sameness. My phone buzzed with both support and scorn. Amid the chaos, storms battered the region, drenching newly cleared plots and turning half-constructed roads into muddy messes. Construction slowed. One afternoon, lightning struck dangerously close to the heavy equipment, sending workers scrambling for cover. I watched from my porch, rain drumming on the roof, feeling oddly vindicated. Nature itself seemed to resist the bulldozers. While the HOA's timeline slipped, our farmland remained intact, absorbing the life-giving rain. I walked the fields after the storm, mud clinging to my boots. Rows of corn stalks bowed under weighty droplets, but they stood rooted. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Resilience amid adversity. When Hector called the next session, he encouraged creative brainstorming. What if we designate a certain percentage of acreage for continuous crop cultivation? He asked. Angela frowned, mumbling about loss of revenue. Christine proposed a revenue-sharing model, where sales from farm produce could offset the developer's costs. Prescott rubbed his chin, half-interested. I suggested a community-supported agriculture program, letting residents pay for seasonal produce. Selena supported the idea with legal terms that would lock in farmland protection. Angela's frustration was evident. She claimed prospective buyers disliked living near tractors and livestock. Hector reminded her that markets showed shifting consumer preferences. A breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. One of the developer's biggest investors, Greencrest Holdings, specialized in environmentally conscious projects. When they learned about the farmland clause, they dispatched their own rep to the negotiations. Her name was Fiona Green, and she came armed with data showing that agri-living communities often attracted premium buyers. Angela looked blindsided by Fiona's presence. Fiona calmly explained that building around the farm could become the project's unique selling point. She insisted they explore how farmland might distinguish this development from cookie-cutter subdivisions. With that shift in perspective, Angela's arguments against farmland suddenly carried less weight. Even so, Angela resisted. She cited concerns about the HOA's brand, claiming they promised residents pristine uniformity. The thought of goats or cows might unsettle certain homeowners. Fiona countered that many modern buyers sought authenticity and local produce. She unveiled slides of successful agrihoods, where property values soared, families engaged with the land, and local ecosystems thrived. Hector nodded thoughtfully, sensing momentum. Angela's poker face cracked just enough to reveal her anxiety. If Greencrest, a major stakeholder, embraced farmland, she risked isolating herself. Prescott studied the slides, recognizing the marketing potential. Selena whispered to me, "This might be the pivot we needed." That evening, our coalition gathered under twinkling string lights in my barn. The mood felt lighter, buoyed by Greencrest's intervention. Christine mapped out the farm's potential expansions: fruit orchards, vegetable patches, and educational tours. The neighbors chimed in with ideas for seasonal festivals or petting zoos for children. Even the local high school principal attended, excited about incorporating agriculture into their curriculum. We toasted apple cider to Grandpa's claws, celebrating a small victory that it had forced everyone to reconsider. Yet, we knew Angela still held the official HOA reins. Until she agreed, the farmland's future remained uncertain. Pressure mounted when Greencrest requested a formal site visit. Angela had little choice but to join, walking my fields alongside Fiona, Christine, and the rest of us. The sun was warm and the soil firm beneath our feet. Birds flitted overhead. I pointed out healthy rows of corn, explaining we rotated crops annually to keep the land fertile. Fiona asked about irrigation and yield capacity. Christine described how integrated farmland could lower the development's carbon footprint. Angela wore designer shoes, grimacing whenever they touched dirt. Still, she kept quiet, absorbing the conversation. Something in her demeanor hinted at reluctant curiosity. Partway through the tour, Angela paused near my grandfather's old tractor, a relic he'd kept in working condition. She stared at its rusted frame, perhaps imagining a different era. Then she glanced toward the horizon, where half-built houses stood in neat rows. "I hope you realize these fields might never look the same," she murmured. I replied softly, "They don't have to remain unchanged, but they don't need to vanish." For a moment, her icy exterior thawed. Then, Fiona called her over to examine potential orchard land, and Angela resumed her guarded posture. Still, I sensed a crack in her resolve. Following that site visit, Greencrest arranged a special meeting with the HOA board. Word leaked that they were pushing an amended plan featuring my farm as an operational centerpiece. Angela was notably absent from the press release, fueling rumors of an internal power struggle. Meanwhile, our coalition scrambled to ensure the farmland portion met the clause's legal requirement. Selena insisted on explicit language preventing the HOA from downgrading it to decorative landscaping. Fiona seemed supportive, telling the board that real agriculture would distinguish this community from all the others. We held our breath, waiting for Angela's next move. Angela finally emerged at the following mediation session, looking tense. Prescott hovered, ready to defend her. Hector greeted everyone, reviewing the new proposal. It devoted a meaningful percentage of acreage to farming, gave the HOA partial oversight, and allowed me and a local farming co-op to manage crops. In return, the HOA would continue building their dream neighborhood around designated fields, marketing it as an eco-friendly haven. Angela criticized certain details, maintenance costs, potential odors, noise, but Fiona reminded her that Greencrest valued these features as selling points. Torn between appeasing investors and her original vision, Angela stared at the document grimly. Days passed without final word. The tension gnawed at me, fueled by occasional sightings of bulldozers revving near our property line. I spent afternoons repairing fences and nurturing seedlings, hoping we'd soon have clarity. One twilight, Selena phoned. "The HOA's board is split, but Greencrest has majority sway. They might push Angela aside if she doesn't comply." Relief and guilt mingled in my chest. I never intended to unseat anyone, only to protect farmland. Yet if preserving these acres meant Angela's downfall, so be it. Grandpa's clause was uncompromising. We'd tried to collaborate, but progress demanded acceptance on both sides. Finally, we received official notice. The HOA had scheduled a public unveiling of their revised site plan. The event would occur at a newly constructed community center near the partially built houses. Nervous excitement coursed through me. Our coalition arrived early, noticing the tension among the developers' representatives. Angela stood off to one side, her expression indecipherable. Fiona greeted us warmly, promising a presentation that addressed farmland integration. Local media gathered, cameras poised. I rubbed my clammy hands on my jeans, recalling how Dad once said real courage meant facing your fears under glaring lights. Tonight would test that resolve. The presentation began with glossy slides of sleek homes, walking trails, and communal amenities. At first, it looked like any other suburban pitch. Then Fiona advanced to the farmland segment. Aerial renderings showed open fields, maintained for crops, a barn, turned marketplace, and orchard groves flanking sidewalks. My heart thumped. She explained how local produce could be sold on site, how school groups could visit, and how farmland would remain an authentic fixture rather than a gimmick. Applause broke out among some attendees, while others seemed skeptical. Angela remained motionless. Fiona concluded by noting the deed's clause mandated these provisions, ensuring they couldn't be stripped away. During the Q&A, someone asked if homeowners would be forced to hear tractors at sunrise. Christine answered, explaining best practices to minimize disruption and how modern farming equipment could be quieter and more efficient. Another resident worried about pesticide use. We assured them the farm would adopt eco-friendly methods whenever possible. A skeptical voice piped up, claiming property values might suffer. Fiona pointed to studies showing well-managed farmland often increased desirability. Through it all, Angela said little. Her silence loomed. Finally, someone directly asked if the HOA fully supported farmland inclusion. All eyes shifted to Angela, who slowly approached the microphone. She cleared her throat, gaze sweeping the room. This plan differs from our initial vision. We wanted uniform streets and tidy lawns, but Greencrest has convinced us, and so has our farming community, that embracing agriculture can elevate our neighborhood. Her tone was measured but not exactly enthusiastic. Still, hearing her concede felt monumental. She added, "We'll proceed with farmland integration, provided the community and landowners abide by regulations to keep it clean and safe." A wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't a glowing endorsement, but it was a public acceptance. I saw Fiona exhale, looking equal parts satisfied and cautious. The official unveiling concluded with a shaky but meaningful nod toward compromise. Reporters quickly flocked to interview Fiona, Christine, and me. Angela slipped out, avoiding further conversation. The next morning, local headlines read, "HOA shifts course, adopts farmland model." The piece described Grandpa's clause as the game changer, forcing the developer to incorporate genuine agriculture. My phone buzzed endlessly, neighbors rejoicing, environmental groups congratulating us, and curious folks inquiring how to replicate this approach. Selena reminded me we still had many details to finalize: operational rules, budgets, oversight committees. Yet the biggest hurdle, acceptance of farmland's rightful place, seemed surmounted. My spirit soared. In the weeks that followed, county officials approved the revised design, praising it as a forward-thinking example. Greencrest allocated funds for farmland infrastructure, irrigation systems, soil improvement, and a small farmers market pavilion. Christine helped coordinate everything, ensuring we balanced aesthetics with practicality. Meanwhile, the partially built houses gained value, attracting buyers who liked the concept of local produce and open space. Even some skeptics admitted the farmland aspect intrigued them. Still, behind the scenes, Angela's resentment festered. Rumors suggested she felt cornered into compliance. I braced for potential sabotage or micromanagement. Yet for now, progress gleamed like a fresh sunrise. We formed a farm oversight committee composed of me, Christine, a Greencrest rep, and 2 homeowner volunteers. Our task was to maintain transparency, bridging residents' concerns with farming realities. Meetings took place in a refurbished barn on the edge of the property. We debated everything from fence heights to composting methods. The volunteers asked about safe pest control, noise regulations, and events that might draw crowds. Christine assured them responsible planning could accommodate everyone's needs. The vibe was mostly collaborative, though occasional friction surfaced when suburban expectations clashed with rural realities. Still, we pressed on, forging a new kind of neighborhood. A few months in, we held the first farm day, inviting future residents to experience hands-on activities. Children petted goats, planted seedlings, and learned how vegetables grew. Adults sampled fresh honey from local beekeepers, snapping photos of orchard blossoms. The media covered the event, dubbing it a celebration of innovation meets tradition. I roamed the grounds, marveling at the synergy. Grandpa's claws had sparked a revolution in how people saw farmland. No longer a throwaway relic, it became the neighborhood's beating heart. As the sun set, families lingered, chatting excitedly about moving in. I felt a lump of pride in my throat. However, not everyone was thrilled. One resident, Margot, complained that farm odors wafted into her yard. Another disliked hearing roosters at dawn, claiming it disrupted her sleep. The HOA fielded these gripes with measured responses, reminding them they'd purchased homes near an operational farm. Angela seized these moments, criticizing the inconveniences farmland caused. She hinted the entire experiment might fail if residents rebelled. I worried about her influence. Selena advised me to document every complaint resolution, ensuring we complied with local nuisance laws. We had to prove farmland and suburban life could coexist without fueling a backlash that dismantled everything. A separate problem emerged when a late frost threatened our budding orchard. Christine rallied volunteers to protect blossoms with tarps and heaters. Future residents joined in, some wearing pajamas, braving the cold to help. Their willingness to safeguard the crops stirred a sense of community. At dawn, we peeled back the coverings, relieved to see most blossoms intact. Exhausted, we shared hot cocoa and marveled at how farmland pulled people together. Even Margot laughed about nearly freezing her toes off while saving apples. These small victories reassured me that the farmland vision could flourish, provided we nurtured collaboration as carefully as our plants. We soon instituted monthly farm workshops, teaching composting, gardening basics, and sustainable pest management. Classes filled quickly, with residents eager to cultivate their own plots. Children proudly carried home potted herbs. The hum of curiosity replaced initial skepticism. Greencrest advertised the farm amenities heavily, drawing new buyers who valued green space. Media outlets continued featuring us, calling this development a bellwether for future housing trends. Even the county tourism office listed our farm market as an attraction. Still, amid the success, I sometimes glimpsed Angela scowling at the edges of events, seemingly biding her time. I braced for whatever might come next. A confrontation finally erupted at an HOA meeting over budgets. Angela argued that farm maintenance costs overshadowed the benefits. She wanted stricter rules, limiting animals and restricting certain crops. Fiona countered with data showing home values had risen due to the farm's appeal. Residents spoke up, praising the fresh produce and community bonding. Angela refused to relent, warning that inevitable challenges, droughts, pests, rising operational costs could sour public opinion. She pushed a motion to scale back the farmland, but the board, influenced by Fiona and satisfied residents, voted it down. Angela stormed out, leaving a tense hush in her wake. Despite that drama, life in the new community settled into a rhythm. Construction finished on most homes and families moved in, planting flower beds alongside farmland rows. Mornings brought tractor sounds and rooster calls, while evenings saw neighbors strolling along paths that skirted the orchard. The local farmers' market thrived under the pavilion, offering seasonal produce and handmade goods. Children played tag between vegetable rows, forging memories that mirrored my own childhood on this very land. Sometimes I'd stop mid-chores, stunned by the transformation. We'd woven farmland and modern suburbia into a single, vibrant tapestry. It felt both surreal and deeply right. I remained cautious. Grandpa's clause had forced a compromise, but any shift in HOA leadership could threaten the farmland again. Selena reassured me, pointing to ironclad legal language preventing a total rollback. Nonetheless, Angela still lurked, hinting about lawsuits over nuisance violations or compliance issues. She pored over the fine print, searching for weaknesses. To counter this, we built strong relationships with the new homeowners. We held potlucks, invited them to help plant crops, and listened to their suggestions. By ensuring they felt invested in the farm, we hoped they would resist any future attempts to dismantle it. One scorching afternoon, I received unexpected news. Angela had resigned as HOA president, claiming personal reasons. Rumors swirled. Some said she clashed with her own board. Others believed Greencrest pressured her out. She left behind a letter to residents, warning them that farmland might be a burden in the long run, but most people brushed it off. The new HOA president, a mild-mannered accountant named Gerald, was more supportive of the agricultural vision. With Angela gone, the tension around implementing farmland policies eased. I hoped it signaled a permanent shift toward acceptance. Grandpa's clause no longer felt like a reluctant compromise. Freed from leadership conflict, we refined the farm's operations. Christine helped me secure grants for sustainable irrigation and introduced solar-powered lighting around the orchards. The Farm Oversight Committee expanded to include a resident veterinarian, ensuring animal welfare. We even experimented with community garden plots for each cul-de-sac, encouraging residents to grow personal vegetables or flowers. Folks started sharing tips, swapping seeds, and collectively tackling weeds. A sense of camaraderie blossomed, bridging generational gaps. Grandpa would have been proud. The farmland, once on the brink of extinction, became integral to daily life. Occasionally, I'd pause in the fields, overwhelmed by gratitude for that single clause. As the seasons cycled, children who grew up in these homes barely remembered a time when farmland wasn't standard. They fed goats after school, celebrating birthdays under orchard blossoms. Elderly neighbors reminisced about how farmland used to sprawl across the county, now mostly replaced by asphalt. The synergy between modern comfort and agricultural heritage felt miraculous. Local businesses formed partnerships, stocking fresh produce from our farm. A once doubting real estate agent admitted he used to see farmland as wasted space, but now recognized it as a treasure. There were still obstacles, weather, pests, budgets, but the community tackled them with collective resilience. I marveled at how each new challenge reaffirmed the farm's importance. One summer, a heat wave threatened to shrivel everything. Residents pitched in, watering plants at dawn and dusk, draping shade cloths over delicate seedlings. The orchard survived, producing sweet, if smaller, fruit. Our farm stand sold out daily, and neighbors rallied around older folks who couldn't handle the heat. Soon after, we held a harvest festival, featuring homemade jams, pies, and fresh bread. Music filled the air as families danced among hay bales. Staring at the beaming faces, I recalled Angela's dire predictions. She hadn't accounted for the power of community spirit. Through it all, the deed clause remained our cornerstone. Each prospective homeowner signed documents acknowledging the farm's permanent status. Visitors often commented on how unusual it was to see row crops next to modern houses. Yet they also praised the authenticity and sense of belonging. Walking the paths at sunset, I'd smile at the golden light draping cornstalks and rooftops alike. I sometimes imagined Grandpa's voice whispering, "We did it." The farmland was no longer an afterthought. It was woven into the identity of this place. Despite storms, disputes, and one determined adversary, that single clause had birthed lasting change. In time, word spread beyond our county. Environmental journalists visited, documenting the model of a neighborhood anchored by working farmland. Christine gave tours to city planners curious about integrating green spaces more dynamically. Colleges sent students to study our cooperative structure, investigating how the farm and HOA resolved conflicts. Even Fiona occasionally stopped by, proud to see how her championing of farmland had taken root. Each success story made me think back to the bulldozers looming at our fence line, the sinking feeling of helplessness. Now, as a new generation tilled the soil, I realized we'd gained far more than land. Still, with expansion came new hurdles. Extra residents meant increased foot traffic and the need for additional farm staff. We had to carefully manage irrigation demands to avoid stressing local water supplies. The HOA asked us to refine hours for tractor usage to respect night shift workers. We compromised, scheduling major field work later in the morning. These adjustments tested everyone's patience, but they underscored the principle that farmland and suburban life required mutual respect. Each resolution drew us closer, reminding us why Grandpa's clause existed, to ensure farmland wouldn't vanish under a wave of development, but rather find a way forward together. Grandpa's battered tractor still stood near the barn, a symbol of resilience. Whenever I felt doubt, I'd climb onto its rusted seat, recalling childhood days spent riding alongside Dad. The engine no longer ran, but memories roared to life. This farm had witnessed births, funerals, bountiful harvests, and near bankruptcy. It also endured the threat of total erasure by the HOA's bulldozers. Now, it thrived in tandem with new homes. Sometimes children climbing onto that old tractor asked, "Why keep this antique?" I'd smile, explaining that it reminded us how the past fuels the future, just as seeds become next year's bounty. Residents began forming committees to enhance farmland events, from seasonal dinners to produce picking weekends. Their enthusiasm fostered a festive atmosphere year-round. I watched parents teach their kids how to pull carrots or pick strawberries, forging bonds as deep as any farmland tradition. Local bands performed among rows of blossoming fruit trees, turning farmland into a stage for community connection. Even local chefs joined, hosting farm-to-table nights under starlit skies. New families, once unsure about living near a farm, discovered a sense of fulfillment in simpler pleasures. The farmland's presence became a beloved feature, inspiring hope in an era often consumed by sprawl. Some nights I'd wander beneath the moonlit orchard, hearing distant laughter from backyard gatherings. Fireflies flickered above rows of corn. Standing there, I'd reflect on the improbable journey that saved our land. In a swirl of lawsuits, hostility, and relentless compromise, we unlocked a harmony that neither side initially believed possible. Grandpa's clause had been the key, but everyone's cooperation shaped the final outcome. If we'd relied solely on legalities, we might have ended with a bitter standoff. Instead, we found a path that enriched both farmland and modern living. Shadows of orchard rows stretched across newly paved streets, testaments to enduring balance. Years passed, and the neighborhood matured. Children who once helped tarps over frosty trees left for college, carrying memories of donkey rides and orchard picnics. Retirees cultivated friendships in community gardens, swapping recipes for homegrown produce. Even the architecture evolved, as new houses implemented solar panels and water-saving appliances. We hosted an annual conference on suburban agriculture, drawing visitors from across the country. Sometimes I'd catch a newcomer marveling at the orchard's blossoms or the cheerful clucking of free-range hens and think, this was almost lost. That single line in the deed had sparked a story of transformation beyond imagination. Occasionally, people asked me if I ever regretted not taking the big payout. Financial security was tempting, sure, but the intangible wealth we preserved was priceless. My father's barn still stood, repurposed as a community hub filled with laughter during potlucks or craft fairs. We never forgot the months of uncertainty, facing an HOA determined to bury our heritage. Reflecting on it all, I realized Grandpa's insight transcended money. He wanted farmland to remain a living testament to roots, nourishment, and unity. We achieved exactly that, forging a community that recognized farmland as more than dirt. It was a lifeline. An unexpected visitor changed my perspective further. Angela. She returned one fall afternoon, strolling among ripening pumpkins. I approached cautiously, unsure how she'd react. She admitted she'd come to see what became of this experiment. Observing families picking pumpkins, she seemed contemplative. I never thought farmland would blend so seamlessly, she said softly. Her tone lacked the old antagonism. We stood by the barn, recalling the bitterness of our battles. Then she offered a faint smile before departing. That was our final meeting, quiet, reflective, without ceremony. Still, I took it as a sign that even the staunchest skeptic could be moved. As the sun set on another season, a gentle wind rustled golden fields. Children raced through a corn maze while neighbors prepared cider in steaming kettles. The orchard's leaves blazed red and orange, painting the skyline with autumn's splendor. I closed my eyes, recalling everything we'd overcome: bulldozers rumbling, heated town hall debates, cunning negotiations, heartbreak and triumph. In the end, farmland and suburbia didn't collide. They merged. Standing on soil imbued with my father's and grandfather's footsteps, I knew we'd honored their legacy. That single clause might have started as a legal anchor, but it blossomed into our community's guiding light. So here we remain, a modern neighborhood rooted in heritage, proving that true progress honors the past even as it builds the future. Grandpa's clause, once dismissed as trivial, saved our farm from oblivion. Now it stands as a quiet reminder that one determined voice can reshape an entire world.